A very good evening and welcome to the India Development Debate. I'm Tamanna Inamdar and it's great to bring you this show this Friday evening. The tax man is supposed to now not be breathing down your neck. That's the promise and the vision of the new tax charter unveiled by the Prime Minister yesterday. But the tax man will also know exactly how much money you've been spending down to the detail of hotel bills, school fees, insurance policies, any great art or even marble that you use in your house. That is a proposal that is being put forward. It's a very interesting one because not all details are available about it and nor has it been notified. But it will not be an easy one to implement. That's our big story this evening that we're talking about. Is it the right path to widen the tax base? Can you make it easier for taxpayers, not over scrutinize, but widen the tax base by doing all of these measures all together? Don't they contradict each other? That's the big story. We're also catching up on a trend and taking a deep dive into a very interesting trend that's emerging. Now, work from home was thrust upon a lot of us in March this year. But for many companies and employees, it has now become a preference. Surveys have been showing that. In fact, one survey shows 70% of employees prefer to work from home. Those looking for jobs working from home, those numbers have gone up as well. We're going to take a look at that trend up ahead. And you will also hear from global guru Mark Faber on how to get rich and stay rich. But let's begin with our big story, which is on how the tax man will have you on his radar or her radar even without you knowing perhaps. This is because there is a new list of items which is proposed to be notified while filing your returns. This includes medical insurance premium, hotel bills, school fees, even electricity consumption over 1 lakh rupees per annum. Let me first go across to my colleague Ruchi Bhatia, who has all of those details. Ruchi, now the stated mission of the tax charter and what the Prime Minister said on Thursday was very clearly that there should be less scrutiny. We're going towards a faceless sort of tax assessment. And on the other hand, you now have a system where all of this will possibly be tracked. What are the items which will be tracked and how do the two sit together?
The idea is that there should be more trust between taxpayers as well as the tax department. On one hand, the Prime Minister said that the tax department needs to move to its new role from being a tax enforcer to being a tax facilitator. But one cannot take away from the fact that out of a population of 130 crores, we only have just about 1.5 crore people that are paying taxes. And which is why if the government has to provide for roads, for infrastructure, for social security, where else will they get the money from? Currently, under the Form 26AS of the Income Tax Act, we already have a lot of high value transactions that get self-populated into the income tax return form. Now what the government intends on doing, while on one hand they have a taxpayer charter which will list out the rights and the obligations of a tax-paying citizen, on the other hand they're also looking to widen the tax net to ensure that the people who have or who can afford, they actually pay taxes. In fact, for example, if you have hotel bills of over 20,000 rupees, if you're paying rent of over 40,000 rupees, if you're paying educational institutes fee of over 1 lakh rupees, if your electricity consumption is over 1 lakh rupees, then all these high value transactions will make way into your Form 26AS of the Income Tax Act. While it has not been notified so far, the idea is that at a later date it will be notified, it will be asked by your taxman. And while it could be a more faceless way of assessing your tax returns and you being able to make a faceless appeal, but one cannot take away from the fact that if now you are able to afford a domestic business class air ticket ticket travel, or if you have deposits of over 1 crore in your current account and you have spent as much as 2 lakh rupees on your foreign travel, then the tax department is liable to ask you questions. In fact, not just that. Remember, the tax department earlier also had said that if you were purchasing jewelry of over 2 lakh rupees, then you had to provide your PAN details. But now what the tax department is saying, that purchase of jewelry, white goods, painting, marble above 1 lakh rupees, all will have to be defined, and all this information will have to be provided to the taxman. As I said, it has not been notified now, but at a later date it will be notified. You cannot have a nation of 130 crore people and just about 1.5 crore people paying taxes. The Prime Minister made it very clear.
Absolutely, Ruchi. Now, the question is, how will this be implemented, and will this effectively mean more scrutiny of citizens? To speak on this, I'm joined today by Dinesh Kanabar, CEO of Dhruva Advisors. I'm also speaking with Pranav, Sayta, transaction tax leader at Ernst Young, and BM Singh, former chairman of CBDT, is also joining us on the show. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for speaking with us. Mr. Kanabar, let me just get your view on this new list of items. What about implementability? Do you think that this will be an issue at all?
So if you look at some of the countries where tax compliance is at its peak, take USA for example, the IRS is able to track every single transaction, so that when you file your tax return, they don't need to really come and ask anything because everything is right out there. And what the government is trying to do here is to say, at the one hand, we don't need you to come and wait outside and sort of be questioned, but if all the information that is required for us to make an assessment on you is with us, and today that is very much possible thanks to technology, then we know exactly what your income is, what your expenditure is there a mismatch? And if there is something which we therefore believe that you are earning but you have not declared, we can ask you those questions. So to my mind, it's a very logical step with the evolution of technology. You know, I heard you talk earlier as to whether the two were contradicting. On one hand, we are talking about a faceless assessment, on the other hand, a deeper scrutiny. I don't think the two really are contradictory. In fact, to my mind, the two complement each other, because it's the job of the government to really get the right information, so that if, for example, you are paying your expenses and they are in cash, that means there is an unaccounted income somewhere, and that needs to be questioned. So on the one hand, you need the government not to harass the taxpayers. At the same time, the government needs to have that information to decipher as to whether people are paying their due taxes or not. As to the doability, again, as was earlier mentioned, many of the provisions have already been there. So, for example, on jewelry, if you make a purchase of more than 2 lakhs, you are required to give your permanent account number. There is one issue, of course, which always comes up, that all policies are very good on paper. It's the implementation which is the key. And thanks to the technology, it is possible for the government to implement it. And if that implementation does happen, I would think we have the ability to broaden our tax base and ensure that the honest taxpayers, who today probably are sometimes being hounded to expand the tax net, instead of that, we'll have actually the larger scheme of things where people who really should be within the tax net and are not there really are asked to pay taxes.
Yeah, no, so you're right that, for example, purchase of jewelry was already there, but the threshold is now proposed to be made 1 lakh rupees. Mr. Sayta, let me come to you on the levels, and I think what people are wondering right now is about the levels of expenditure, and are these very quote unquote high that deserve to be in this bracket of scrutiny? So, for example, hotel bills over 20,000. It doesn't say per day or anything like that, but hotel bills overall over 20,000, or rentals of 40,000 rupees. I mean, anyone living in cities like Bombay, Delhi might not think that that is a very, very high amount, or even school fees of or college education of 1 lakh rupees per annum. So do you think that there is an attempt to, in that sense, massively broad base?
Oh, yes, indeed. So some of these limits seem to be extremely low. A limit to be crossed for these provisions to start trigger and applying. Now, the point, however, is that if we look at the metros, probably these limits might seem very low, whether it is in terms of rental or some of the other things. But when we go to, or even the educational fees, but when we go to some of the smaller towns, these limits look very, very reasonable. So one wonders whether from a national perspective, the government is trying to say that, okay, if this data can be easily collected now, and given the environment in which we are with a technology enabled piece, the excessive data that can come in can also be wisely monitored and appropriately applied to ensure that the tax base is widened. It might still be workable from a compliance implementation standpoint. The question, however, is, of course, for some of the larger cities where the numbers can be very low, especially for the hotel billings, as you said, 20,000 looks an extremely low number. Similarly, the rental for some of the larger cities and even the Mediclaim or the health insurance premiums, especially for people beyond a certain age, 20,000 can be hit very easily if it's a husband-wife scenario. So what we are talking of is some of these thresholds probably can be increased, but the concept seems absolutely correct that one must get to a situation where there is enough data and information with the government. Honest taxpayers do not feel shortchanged, that here are some honest taxpayers who keep getting the burden of the entire tax, and that there are other taxpayers who probably are not paying enough or not at all in the tax net, but ought to be, are obviously brought within the tax net so that the tax can be collected from a much wider range of the population, which I think is the need of the hour. Some of the data I do feel becomes too much of compliance for the businesses themselves. So that's the big burden that I would feel worried about. And much of this data might be already available, for example, through the GST filings. So why get businesses to also submit much of this data in addition to the GST filings which are already available? So a lot of this data, I think, can be culled out from some of the other data, information and filings that are already being done by businesses and taxpayers alike. And therefore, I would feel that if the compliance burden is not additionally thrust upon businesses, it might be helpful.
So, in fact, that is the key question, isn't it? That will the compliance burden come on business? For example, who would be your specified persons in some of these cases who have to report the SFT or the special financial transactions? Would it be hotels? In the case of art, would it be, art galleries? We are assuming that all of these payments will happen electronically or via card, but the fact is for amounts like 20,000, 40,000 a month, they may still take place in cash even in the current scenario. Do you see this as a challenge, Mr. Singh? Let me come to you on this.
Actually, it's a challenge, but it is doable. We were thinking about this even when I was in the board, about getting people's records of expenditure online or reporting online so that they can be verified with their tax returns. And I had put up a proposal to the FM also at that time, and it concerned what the Koreans had really made great strides in, that is to reporting of all small expenditure through a cash card system, which was, the information was sent to their tax department, was sent to their each side, the person who's receiving the amount as well as the person who's spending it. And they had got an increase of $8 billion at the time when there was a slide in the Asian countries in the 1998 and all. But this is an extremely high challenge as far as India is concerned, because we are a much, much bigger country. And we have to develop the systems to be able to analyze the information which will be sent to us and to allocate it to the concerned officer or the jurisdictional officer. And while we are talking about this, we are at a very momentous moment. The whole income tax department's process of doing assessments has been turned on its head with this faceless system of assessments. The entire thing is as if the whole department is being given is being reborn the way they're going to go, there'll be nobody knows who your assessing officer would be, where they send it for another opinion, or for a technical opinion, or for for the persons to scrutinize, not just scrutinize, but to see whether what you said is correct. I mean, there are 2-3 places, and 2/3 of the department are going to be doing just that under a particular Directorate General of Income Tax. And the rest of the department are going to be doing routine work. Now, this is as faceless as you can expect it to be. The only problem is that the implementation, pudding is as good as it tastes. So while they're implementing it, I feel there are going to be a lot of hurdles and bumps while we implement it. But I feel that with proper supervision, that they can pass it. I think it's going to be a very good system which will come into being, and it may not be a harassment, but the assessees will start to be on the toes and report the proper taxes, proper income.
Well, there can't be enough of a stronger case that more people need to pay taxes. I mean, you really can't have just such a minimal number of people paying 1.5 crore of people paying taxes on a population of 130 crore rupees people. It's just not going to work. My question is that how is the tax department also reacting to this, Mr. Singh? I mean, there is a letter that has reportedly been written by income tax employees who think that the faceless sort of system is going to be challenging, considering they also have very high targets to match. So on the one hand, you have 2 or 3 ideas that you're trying to put together. You have high targets which are being increased every budget. Then you have to ensure that there's no harassment and the system is completely anonymous and faceless. Plus, you have to ensure that there's scrutiny of all of these kind of expenditures that have been made, and make sure that there's no mismatch.
The bottom line is the technology available, the bandwidth available to collect the information and to analyze it at the proper with the proper officers, to see that it goes to the concerned person who is actually going to be ultimately assessing it. It gets on your file, it gets picked up through a certain algorithm for scrutiny, then it gets allocated automatically to a different assessment unit. Sitting in Delhi, it may be being assessed in Chennai, or vice versa. And then even for a second opinion on certain points, on certain scrutinies, it may go to a third place, it may go to Bombay. Another unit is there. And for technical, there are going to be 4 technical units, say, in the country. We'll be seeing from the technical point of view. So this is all going to be challenging, but doable. But I think it's going to be take about a year or so to settle in before they actually start showing results. Because in the beginning, they need to have persons in the income tax department as well as in the tax-paying people who are computer savvy. The income tax practitioners have to be computer savvy. The officers have to be computer savvy, and how to get about it. One point which I noticed, and which was not, I didn't get a proper answer, is that the assessee can ask for a personal hearing, which will be again faceless because you won't be able to see the face of the assessing officer who will give him a hearing. But the officer can't ask for a hearing in the sense, but he can send it to another person for getting a particular inquiry done. And that is supposing somebody has a cash credit. Now, and you don't believe what has been told to you, and you want to take a statement. How do you go about taking a statement? So these are little hitches or little things which have to be worked over, and to see. You see, on one side, we have the people, the tax department in the USA, in Europe and all, where the tax audit is done by visiting the person's premises and sitting on his head and seeing all his accounts. And here we're going totally in a different way. Let's see how successful it is.
No, but I think most people are welcoming it. Most people are welcoming it, and it needs to be welcomed because I think some of that balance needs to be maintained. Tax harassment had become synonymous with the way the system works, and that has to be pushed back. I want to come back to the issues of compliance, especially for companies. And Mr. Kanabar, I'd like your view on this. It's a point that Pranav Sayta made a short while ago. Who is going to ensure that this information goes to the tax department, assuming that people will not, or some people may not declare this themselves? And I'm talking about things like whether they bought marble, or how much fees they have paid, or hotel bills. Now, will it fall upon these businesses to ensure that this information is passed on?
Yeah. So take for example, you mentioned marble. And if somebody goes and purchases marble, then it is the job of the dealer who's selling this marble to you in excess of the prescribed limit to ask you for your permanent account number and then electronically upload that information to the tax office. I think there are 2 points I would like to make. There has been a citizens charter which has been presented, and the citizens charter has got 14 points. And one of the points which the government has made is to ensure that the compliance burden is not high. So there is a recognition that there is a need to decrease the compliance burden. To your point, it really is a technology issue. So for example, today, when jewelers are able to collect information of sales exceeding 2 lakhs, it just has to be above 1 lakh. And remember that as a taxpayer, there is no consequence on you for having done the expenditure. There is nothing which says that if, for example, you make 10 business class visits and you make 4 international tours or whatever else, or you spend so much money on parties, so long as that money is accounted. I think the point which Mr. Singh made, which I think is the heart of the matter, is thereafter, how does this information get reconciled? And I think he hit it on the head when he said that you need to be technologically savvy, both as a taxpayer and as a revenue. And therefore, the question is, today, what is the mechanism under which, again, as Pranav mentioned earlier, you are reconciling the indirect tax and the direct tax information, the information that is filed with the registrar of companies, the information that is filed with SEBI. If electronically that information can be matched and linked to your books of accounts, then you know what are those mismatches. Now, coming to your point again, the information is required to be provided by the business and provided that the businesses are technically connected. So they are all on computers, etc., which you cannot presume everywhere to the length and breadth of the country you are. Then whether the limit is 10,000, 20,000 or 2 lakhs, it's automatic that every time you make a sale, you get a scanned copy. So today, for example, when you go to a hotel and you want to stay in a hotel, forgetting the tax part, every hotel takes your Aadhaar card or whatever identification. Same way, they will ensure that they take your permanent account number and the information is transmitted electronically. The question is, in the smaller towns, is the bandwidth available? Is the broadband facility available? Is at all points of time, can you ensure that you are able to do that?
Exactly.
So
I just want to, we're nearing the end of the discussion, so I just want to get, I just want to get, Pranay's view in on this as well. Compliance beyond the big cities, or where we're assuming that transactions are taking place electronically. I mean, we would be turning a blind eye to reality if we believe that nothing is happening in cash anymore in this country.
Absolutely correct. But I wouldn't really have much sympathy if there is too much in terms of unaccounted monies rotating here in regard to these transactions. The real thing is there should not be an unnecessarily additional compliance burden being put upon the shoulders of businesses, whether it is educational institutions, hotels, whether it is whatever the case may be, travel agents and so on. The point therefore is that if the GST information is already there, why not at the same database, the same information, rather than asking businesses, especially MSMEs and especially in smaller towns and tier 2, tier 3 towns, to submit this as an additional compliance bill. That's really the thing I would feel. And in terms of reconciling, matching data in regard to all these new faceless assessments appeals. I think we must recognize that in all of this, when there is such a far-reaching change being made, when there's a paradigm shift, the change is so bold and so many of them, that it will take some time to stabilize it. There will be teething troubles. But if at the end of the year, maybe 2 years, we are able to really make a difference to the tax base of this country, I think it will still be worth it. There might even be some impact on consumption, on demand, because people might be
Well, that's the elusive dream.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, consumption is, I get your point, Pranav, but I have to end just by saying that consumption is a different story altogether. Consumption is dampened for several reasons right now. Tax compliance may just be, possible tax scrutiny may just be one of them. There are enough issues as far as consumption is concerned. But I have to end this first discussion. I'm absolutely out of time, sir. I'm sorry, but I'm absolutely out of time. We will pick this up. This is a very interesting discussion that we're having here on a hot issue. But I will have to wrap this first big story here and thank all of you for joining in with the hope that we do widen the tax base. That is the need of the hour.